Hey guys, what's up? It's Scisant here to tell you in probably more detail than you need to know how to do a saddle stitch. Let's jump right in. To understand why I'm going to tell you to do things the way that I'm going to, let's first examine a few things. We're going to roughly trim the edge, then mark and stamp some holes, and then run some thread through the thing. Why do you need to punch holes in leather separately? What makes it different to fabric? Well, leather crafting needles are blunt. Basically, for veg tan this thick and hard, even the sharpest needle you can imagine wouldn't be able to pierce through without, frankly, ridiculous amounts of effort, and so blunt needles. And blunt needles will need holes, and so punching holes with a pricking iron will be the way to go. When we punch these holes though, we'll want to make sure they're evenly spaced in from the edge of the leather. This is more for aesthetics than strength, and if you want to put a messy and meandering line of stitches on your leather, then don't let me stop you. So to make sure they're evenly spaced from the edge, we need to make sure the edge is at least sort of clean. I'll be going into way more detail about edge treatment in the next video, so there's your subscription hook. I'm going to tidy up the edges with a knife, just trimming off any bits that stick out. And after this, I'll give it a quick once over just with some 80 grit sandpaper wrapped around a wooden block. Once you've got an even edge, there are many different ways that you can evenly draw your line. All you need is something with a fixed width. The lowest tech option is simply using one's own thumbnail, like so. If you want to make sure that your seam is the same distance from the edge as your stitch length, then you can actually use the pricking iron itself, like thus. And then there are many different styles of calipers, wing dividers, etc., which you can simply dial into your desired width and use, such as like this example. Now, the pricking irons that I've glossed over in that previous paragraph. These will come in several sizes and tine count. Here I have a 4mm with 4 tines, a set of 6mm with various tine counts, and a 4mm with way too many tines. Oh, and here's a homemade 8mm with 2 tines, just to encourage you to mangle your own tools. Here I'll be using my 4mm fork. I think it's a brilliant compromise between speed and ability to go around corners. Here's the exhaustive on how to use them. Place the furthest tine on your starting point and rock the fork towards you so that you can see where the closest tine is touching to. Then give it a few firm taps with your choice of tapping implement. I'm using a poly maul. I also like to use a bone folder to hold the leather down while I retract the fork. You always want to punch holes towards yourself because this makes it easier to see where the tines are actually touching down on the leather. Once you've punched the first hole, you want to put the furthest tine down in the previous hole, and this will keep your spacing consistent and even. So you can see that with a 4-tined fork, I can pretty easily go around gentle curves like this. When you get to tighter curves like here, you might want to use a fork with fewer tines, or pull off this fancy maneuver. Just use the fork to mark the next hole gently, then remove the fork and punch the hole itself with a diamond section awl. Once you have all the holes punched, it's well and truly time to stitch this thing together. I'll be showing you a saddle stitch with a stitching pony, 2 needles, and an awl. Now, similarly to punching the holes, you want to stitch towards yourself, so we'll be putting this piece into the clamp with the front side on my dominant hand. Now, in this case, the front side is just whichever side was face up while you were punching the holes. Let me explain what we're aiming for first, and then I'll explain how to get there. You can see that the holes are diagonal, going from top right to bottom left, and we want the thread to run from the top of one hole to the bottom of the next, so the thread will end up being a top left to bottom right diagonal. This is an aesthetic choice. This is just what I think looks good. To start with, cut the thread. For 2 layers of leather this thick, I know that I'll need just over 4 times the total length of the seam. This is a waxed linen thread, and I'm just going to run it over my beeswax a couple times to really load it up before we get started. Having this waxy thread will make it easier to thread the needles as well. You can just pinch the end of the thread, and the beeswax will help it keep shape as kind of a chisel point that's much easier to put through the eye. Next, you want to pull the thread so that you've got one half of it on either side of the piece, and from here the process is just iterative. Use whichever awl feels most comfortable to you. I'm using my favorite little ballpoint one here. Here's your workflow. Push the awl through from your dominant hand and find the awl with your offhand to lead that needle through it. Committing this to muscle memory will save you from developing a crick in your neck from constantly looking from side to side, and it lets you stitch internal things where you can't see the offhand side. Form a cross with the main hand needle and pull this through with the main hand needle behind the offhand one. Now you can push the main hand needle through in the far corner of the stitch hole and loop the thread around it on the offhand side. This little loop is called casting and is kind of useful for preventing knots, but it is mostly just for nice aesthetics. Now, pull the thread on either side. In this case, my main hand wants to go down and toward me, and my offhand wants to go up and away from me. The direction you pull will determine where in the stitch hole the thread ends up sitting. Now, like I said, this is an iterative process, so let's watch it a few more times. You can see how this process helps to keep the two threads on separate ends of the stitch hole, which makes for this visually pleasing repeating pattern of diagonal stitches on the front and on the back. Saddle stitching makes for a wildly strong seam. If any of you are familiar with hand sewing fabric, it's strong for the same reason that a back stitch is strong. We essentially have two threads running in opposite direction, the grains of which will bind tightly when they're pulled. You finish the seam off by stitching backwards. Try and pierce through the thread with the needles when you do this, and this will cause them to bind tightly, just like a knot. One final touch that I like to do is to hammer down on the seam to flatten any proud thread. This compression also improves the look of the seam, in my opinion.
And there you have it. This tutorial ran a little bit longer than the other ones, but it's my opinion that this is one technique that's worth going into a lot of detail for. And when you start to separate the steps out, you see that each step really feeds into the next. So I didn't want to cut this into two separate videos. Speaking of each step feeding into the next step of this leather crafting project will be treating these gross, ugly edges. I do hope that you will stick around and see that. Maybe give the channel a like and a subscribe while you're here. You guys, thank you so much for watching. Take it easy, and I'll catch you later. I think we got it. I think we fucking got it.